Today we're just going to do a quick demonstration on how I go about doing additional inscriptions. First job is to get a rubbing of the memorial and import that into CorelDRAW. Now I've just done that to scanning it as a PDF and then dragging and dropping the file into CorelDRAW. The next thing I'm going to do is rotate this round so that the text is horizontal. The way I do that is I'll start off by drawing a line across the baseline of those letters. And then selecting by using the Shift key or Control A everything, and then click again to get the rotation arrows. And the reason for drawing that line, as you can see now, is that CorelDRAW knows how to draw lines when you're rotating them, but it doesn't know how to draw the actual text when we're rotating around. So I'm going to drag that round so that line is pretty close to horizontal. I'm going to just draw a rectangle, and the reason I'm going to draw a rectangle is just to see how close to horizontal I got it. It's pretty close. I can see that line there is fine. So I can now delete that line and take it off. Next thing to do is now to start typing in the inscription as it stands on the screen there, just to get an idea of what type of spacing, letter spacing, word spacing, font height. You'll see that I annotate my rubbing, so I know that that line is 30mm high. The gap here is 23, 24mm. This is 15, 16, 15, 17, etc. And I have a reasonable idea that that's a Gaudi font. So I'm just going to type in here Lisa Hatfield, and it's 30mm, and I'm going to be making that in Gaudi extra bold, and the next line is dearly loved daughter, and line spacing was 23, this is 15, and that looks a lot like an Optima font to me. Just click apply at that point. Okay, clearly it's Optima bold, and I can now just pick up my text. Let's do the other way around, and then you can see it all moving together. Just drag that roughly over the letters. I can see that I've managed to get my line spacing about right, my font height is about right, and the text, the font that I've picked is looking pretty good as well. If I just nudge that over, I can see through the, I can see the letters and I can see that's roughly right. It's not all that easy to see through to the rubbing here to find out whether I've got this spot on. So what I actually do is I convert these letters to a different fill. So I'll choose a red colour. I find red just works quite well for this purpose. And I'm now going to apply transparency to this, make it about 50%. That'll do fine. And the reason for doing the transparency is that I can now see through the letters to see whether the weight is correct, whether the shape's actually correct. If I decided it wasn't quite right and I needed a different font and a Gaudi heavy face, for example, I generally tend to do that in here and just choose whichever font I think is looking right from within there. But in this instance, I don't think we're far wrong with Gaudi extra bold. Word spacing's a bit out because the A here is quite close to the H. In terms of the actual letter spacing, if I just select this and move it across, I can see that the gap between my A and my T's not great, but the rest of it isn't a massive amount out. It could probably be widened out a fraction looking at this. I'm not interested in exactly matching the letters here over the letters on the rubbing, because different fonts have different kerning settings, different word spacings, different letter spacings, and so you might find that you get it more or less spot on for the word Hatfield, but the word Lisa doesn't quite work, or vice versa. So what I'm doing is I'm looking for a good approximation. And I would say that the letter spacing in Lisa there is not a bad approximation. And if I move the text over on Hatfield, it possibly could go out a little bit. So I might choose to extend the letter spacing a little bit, but it's not a million miles out. Word spacing though, yeah, I will change the word spacing. So let's see how we can work out what sort of settings to put into there. So if I click the text editor, I have show full options turned on. If I just turn those off, you'll see that that gives me access to the line compression, the letter spacing and the word spacing. And in this instance, I don't think the letter spacing is too bad. I could increase it maybe to 105% just to widen it a little bit, but it's not a million miles out at 100%. Word spacing I am going to bump up. Let's make that 130 and see if that resolves that. It could probably go a little bit further out. Make it 150. That now looks about right in terms of the word spacing. Somewhere between 140 and 150 would be a reasonable guess. If I click apply and then exit, I can just move. Yep, I'm happy with that. That's lining up. Let's have a look at the second inscription. So I'm going to look at dearly loved daughter. In this instance, loved is a bit wide. Yeah, so my letters are a bit wider than the inscription below. So let's click on here and let's look at the letter spacing. I'm going to drop the letter spacing down probably to 95%. And I can now see that my loved is probably going to be about the same length. My dearly, that looks as though it's going to be a similar length. Daughter, it's not quite. But again, we're looking for a good approximation of how the original inscription was done. Word spacing wants to increase slightly. So I'm going to increase the word spacing out to 120. And I can go a bit more than that. Let's move that out to 140. That's looking reasonable. If I'm the way I'm doing this at the moment is I'm looking at the gap between the edge of the Y here and the upright of our Y, the edge of the L on the rubbing and the upright of the L on our rub on our thing, and the edge of the D and the upright on the D. And I can see there that the word spacing there looks pretty good. If I exit out of that and just move the text back over the top, you can see that my word spacing is now pretty much bang on. Here you can see an example of the fact that the overall look of the word is fine. Dearly is going to be about right. It's not quite the same kerning as the original alphabet, but it's close enough. So what I do now is I can then replicate these settings that I've used on these two lines here on my new inscription. So if my new inscription was going to be Fred Hatfield, dearly loved son, and I was to set these to be Gaudi extra bold with 105 and 150 and 95 and 140 and 30. Click apply. I know that my Fred Hatfield now is not going to be too dissimilar to the way that Lisa Hatfield is on the original screen. I can now bring in my memorial shape, size and all the rest of it, and put the fill on the lettering. So if I just I can now add my fill onto my new lettering and do all those sorts of things. But I know that Fred Hatfield is roughly the same as the Lisa Hatfield is on the original screen.